It was just one night of passion, until she walked into the meeting and saw him sitting as CEO. She knew she shouldn't be here, but loneliness had become louder than logic. Ilaria Monroe stared at her phone screen, watching the Hinge notification blink mockingly at her. Someone liked your photo. The same hollow ping that used to spark hope now felt like a reminder of everything wrong with dating in 2025. She swiped it away without looking, just like she'd done with the last 12. The Monarch Coffee House buzzed with the usual Friday night crowd, couples sharing desserts, groups of friends laughing over craft beer, and scattered individuals like herself, all united in their desperate attempt to look busy while secretly hoping someone would notice them. Ilaria adjusted her oversized cardigan and took another sip of her oat milk latte, already cold. Her laptop displayed 3 open tabs: a Duolingo lesson she'd abandoned mid-sentence, a self-care podcast titled Thriving While Black in Tech, and her company's Slack channel where her boss had been radio silent for 2 days. The startup world never slept, but apparently CEOs could ghost their entire team without consequence. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The voice cut through her mental spiral. Ilaria looked up to find a man gesturing toward the empty chair across from her small table. He was tall, with rich brown skin, a perfectly bald head that caught the cafe's warm lighting, and a beard groomed with the kind of precision that suggested he actually had his life together. His eyes held something she hadn't seen in Austin's tech scene, genuine warmth instead of networking calculation. "It's all yours," she said, minimizing her laptop screen instinctively. He sat down with a ceramic mug and a worn paperback, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Not exactly the typical startup bro reading material. "Good choice." Ilaria nodded toward his book. "Baldwin doesn't mess around." "Neither do you, apparently." He smiled, glancing at her laptop. "Working on a Friday night? That's either dedication or avoidance." Ilaria laughed despite herself. "Definitely avoidance. You?" "Same. I'm supposed to be preparing for a new job, but..." He shrugged, taking a sip of what smelled like black coffee. "Sometimes you need to remember what it feels like to just exist, without an agenda." The honesty in his voice surprised her. In Austin's tech bubble, everyone was always crushing it, disrupting industries, or at minimum pivoting strategically. Nobody admitted to just existing. "I'm Ilaria," she said, closing her laptop completely. "Orion." He extended his hand, and when their fingers touched, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed, a connection that had nothing to do with algorithms or compatibility percentages. They talked until the cafe's lights dimmed, and the barista started pointedly stacking chairs. About books, about the exhaustion of performing success, about how social media had turned dating into a job interview you couldn't quit. Orion mentioned his recent move from New York, the burnout that drove him south, the way anxiety felt like carrying around a phone that never stopped buzzing. Ilaria found herself sharing things she'd never posted on LinkedIn, the microaggressions in meetings, the weight of being the only black woman in leadership, the way she'd started questioning if ambition was worth the loneliness it required. "I have a confession," Orion said as they walked toward the parking lot. "I turned my phone off an hour ago, and I feel more present than I have in months." "Revolutionary concept," Ilaria replied, pulling her own phone from her purse and powering it down. "What happens now?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. The Austin skyline glittered behind him, but she only saw the way the streetlight caught the silver in his beard, the way he looked at her, like she was the most interesting thing he'd encountered all year. "Now we break the algorithm," he said softly. What followed was a night that existed outside of social media, beyond documentation or status updates. They drove to his temporary apartment in silence, both understanding that this moment was too fragile for words. In the darkness of his bedroom, with phones silent and notifications impossible, they found something neither dating app could deliver, the rare gift of being completely seen. When Ilaria woke the next morning, Orion was still sleeping, one arm draped across her waist. She memorized the peaceful expression on his face, knowing that whatever this was, it lived in a space too precious to name. She slipped out quietly, leaving no trace except the indent on his pillow and the faint scent of her perfume. After all, some connections were too perfect to risk with last names or follow-up texts. Monday would come soon enough, but for now, she carried the memory of being exactly who she was, with no performance required. The elevator doors opened with a cheerful ding that felt like mockery. Ilaria stepped into the sleek lobby of TechPulse Austin, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floors, with the kind of confidence she'd perfected over years of fake-it-till-you-make-it survival. The weekend had been a blur of overthinking, yoga videos she'd started but never finished, and exactly 17 times she'd almost texted a number she didn't have. "Get it together," she told herself, adjusting the blazer that made her feel like she could conquer quarterly reports and difficult clients with equal ease. Friday night was Friday night. Monday is business. The morning had already started with chaos. Her phone had buzzed at 6 a.m. with a text from Marcus, their interim CEO. "Emergency all hands at 9. New leadership announcement. Don't be late." Ilaria had spent the weekend wondering if the company was finally going under. TechPulse had been hemorrhaging clients since their last product launch flopped spectacularly, and rumors of a buyout had been circulating for months. As project manager, she'd been the one fielding angry client calls and managing a team that was increasingly demoralized. She grabbed her usual Monday morning salvation, a large cold brew with an extra shot, from the lobby cafe, and made her way to the elevator. The familiar knot in her stomach tightened as she thought about the presentation she'd been preparing for weeks, the budget projections that didn't quite add up, and the performance review that was somehow both overdue and terrifying. The elevator filled with her usual Monday morning crowd, Janet from HR looking perpetually stressed, 2 developers discussing weekend gaming marathons, and Bradley from sales practicing his pitch in the mirror. Everyone looked like they were bracing for impact. "Any idea what this announcement is about?" Janet whispered as they reached the 3rd floor. "Probably telling us to update our LinkedIn profiles," Bradley muttered, and despite everything, Ilaria almost smiled. The conference room was already packed when she arrived. Her team had saved her a seat near the back, probably so she could make a quick exit if the news was as bad as they all suspected. She settled in, opened her laptop, and tried to ignore the way her heart was racing. Marcus stood at the front of the room, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. Beside him sat a figure that made every thought in Ilaria's head evaporate. Orion. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him perfectly, his beard trimmed even more precisely than she remembered, and when he glanced around the room, she saw him register her presence with the slightest widening of his eyes. For a moment, that felt like hours. They stared at each other across a room full of oblivious colleagues. "This cannot be happening." "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Orion Hale, our new CEO," Marcus was saying, but the words sounded like they were coming from underwater. "Orion comes to us from RapidScale in New York, where he successfully led digital transformation initiatives that resulted in—" Ilaria stopped listening. Her mind was racing through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. The man she'd spent Friday night with, the man who'd seen her in ways no one had in years, was now sitting at the head of the table, nodding professionally as Marcus outlined the company's challenges. She watched Orion's face for any sign of recognition, any hint that he was as stunned as she was. But his expression remained perfectly composed, the picture of executive competence. Only she could see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once against the table before he caught himself. "Orion will be meeting with department heads individually over the next few days," Marcus continued, "starting with our project management team this afternoon." Of course. Ilaria felt her phone buzz with a Slack notification. Without thinking, she glanced down to see a direct message from a username she didn't recognize. "Oh, Hale, we need to talk. Conference room B. 5 minutes." Her hands were shaking as she typed back, "This is insane. Tell me about it, please, 5 minutes." She looked up to find Orion's eyes on her again, and this time, behind the professional mask, she saw something that looked like panic. The meeting dragged on for another 20 minutes, covering budget restructures and team realignments, but Ilaria heard none of it. She was too busy calculating exit strategies, wondering if she could transfer to their LA office, or maybe just quit and become a yoga instructor like she'd threatened to do after particularly bad client calls. When Marcus finally dismissed them, she lingered, pretending to organize her notes while the room cleared. Orion was surrounded by eager employees introducing themselves, shaking hands, making the kind of small talk that would normally make her skin crawl. She slipped out quietly and made her way to Conference Room B, a small glass-walled space usually reserved for difficult client calls. Through the transparent walls, she could see Orion approaching from the other direction, still looking every inch the polished executive. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a judge's gavel. "So," Ilaria said, crossing her arms, "this is awkward." The silence between them could have powered the entire building. Orion loosened his tie slightly, a gesture so familiar it made Ilaria's chest tighten. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of Conference Room B, he looked different, more guarded, like he'd rebuilt walls she'd watched him tear down just 3 nights ago. "Awkward doesn't begin to cover it," he said finally, running a hand over his head. "Ilaria, I had no idea you worked here. When they sent me the organizational chart, your name wasn't—" "I go by E. Munro in company documents," she interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "Professional branding. Apparently it matters in tech." The bitter edge in her tone wasn't lost on him. She watched his expression shift as he processed the weight of that statement, the reality of being a black woman in spaces that weren't built for her, the careful calculations she made every day, just to be taken seriously. "This complicates things," Orion said quietly. "That's an understatement." Ilaria moved to the window, looking out at downtown Austin. From the 3rd floor she could see the coffee shop where everything had started, its familiar green awning now seeming like evidence of some cosmic joke. "What exactly is the protocol here? Do I transfer departments? Request a different manager, pretend we've never met?" "I don't know." His honesty surprised her. "In New York I dealt with hostile takeovers and board coups. This isn't covered in any leadership manual." She turned back to face him, studying the man who'd held her with such tenderness, now standing rigidly behind a conference chair, like it was armor. "So, what do you know?" "I know I took this job because I needed a fresh start. I know I've been in therapy for 6 months, trying to figure out how to be a human being again, after my last company nearly killed me." He paused, his fingers drumming that same nervous pattern against the chair back. "And I know that Friday night was the first time I'd felt like myself in over a year." The admission hung between them, like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "Orion, I also know," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "that I can't stop thinking about the way you laughed at my terrible Baldwin quote, or how you looked when you thought I was asleep Saturday morning." Ilaria's breath caught. "You were awake? I watched you memorize my face like you were trying to hold on to something precious." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the conference room disappeared. "Were you?" Before she could answer, a sharp knock interrupted them. Through the glass wall they could see Marcus approaching with a stack of folders and what looked like an urgent expression. "Shit," Ilaria whispered, immediately stepping back from the window. "Mr. Hale?" Marcus knocked again. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have the quarterly reports ready for your review." Orion straightened his tie and opened the door with practiced corporate ease. "Of course, Ilaria and I were just discussing the Henderson project timeline." "Perfect," Marcus beamed, apparently oblivious to the tension crackling between them. "Ilaria's our best project manager. She'll get you up to speed on all our client relationships." Ilaria forced a smile that felt like swallowing glass. "Happy to help." "Excellent. Orion, I've scheduled your one-on-ones with department heads for this week. Ilaria, you're penciled in for Thursday at 2 p.m. Marcus handed over the folders. "And don't forget about the Henderson presentation tomorrow. The client specifically requested you lead it." Of course they did. The Henderson account was their biggest remaining client, and the presentation had been keeping her awake for weeks. Now she'd have to deliver it with Orion watching, evaluating her performance like she was just another employee instead of— What were they exactly? "I'll be there," she said. Marcus left with a cheerful wave, and they were alone again. But the spell was broken. The corporate reality had reasserted itself, complete with scheduled meetings and professional obligations. "Thursday at 2 p.m., Orion repeated softly. "Guess we'll have plenty to discuss." Ilaria gathered her laptop and notebook, suddenly desperate to escape the glass box that felt more like a fishbowl than a conference room. "Should I prepare talking points about project management methodologies, or should we just pretend we don't know what each other looks like naked?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, fueled by frustration and confusion and the growing realization that this situation was impossible. Orion flinched slightly. "Ilaria, I need to get back to work," she said, already moving toward the door. My new CEO is probably expecting results. She was halfway out the door when his voice stopped her. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I meant what I said about that night. All of it. Ilaria paused, her hand on the door handle, but didn't turn around. So did I, she whispered. That's what makes this so complicated. She had rehearsed this presentation 17 times, but nothing had prepared her for this. Ilaria stood at the head of the conference room, her laptop connected to the large monitor, slides perfectly aligned, and her hands remarkably steady despite the chaos in her chest. The Henderson Industries team sat around the polished table, 3 executives in identical navy suits who held their company's future in their quarterly budget decisions. And at the far end of the table, taking notes with the focused attention of someone who had every right to be there, sat Orion. The Q3 analytics show a 23% increase in user engagement following our optimization protocols, Ilaria said, clicking to the next slide with practiced precision. Her voice carried the confident authority she'd cultivated over years of proving herself in rooms exactly like this one. These metrics directly correlate with Henderson Industries' KPIs, particularly in the 25 to 34 demographic. Robert Henderson, the company's VP of Digital Strategy, leaned forward with interest. Walk us through the retention rates. Our previous vendor couldn't crack the 60% barrier. This was the moment she'd been building toward. Ilaria moved to the whiteboard, marker in hand, and began sketching out user journey maps with the kind of fluid expertise that made complex concepts look effortless. She felt the familiar rush of being in her element, the place where all her preparation, intelligence, and instincts aligned perfectly. The key insight came from behavioral analysis, she explained, drawing connecting lines between different user touchpoints. Traditional models assume linear progression, but our data revealed that Henderson's users actually prefer a more exploratory experience. She was 3 minutes into her explanation when she caught Orion's expression. He wasn't just listening, he was watching her with something that looked dangerously close to admiration, the kind of look that had nothing to do with quarterly projections and everything to do with the way she'd explained her theories about life and ambition over cold coffee at 1 a.m. Focus, she commanded herself, but the damage was done. Her awareness of him in the room shifted everything. Every gesture felt deliberate, every word carefully chosen, not just for the clients, but for the man who'd seen her without any masks at all. These retention improvements translate directly to Henderson's bottom line, she continued, forcing herself to maintain eye contact with the actual decision makers. We're projecting a 40% increase in customer lifetime value over the next 12 months. Impressive, said Helena Morrison, Henderson's chief marketing officer. But what about scalability? Our user base is growing rapidly, and we can't afford bottlenecks during peak seasons. Ilaria smiled. This was the question she'd hoped for, the one that would let her showcase the technical architecture that had taken her team months to perfect. I'm glad you asked. For the next 15 minutes, she walked them through server optimization, load balancing protocols, and automated scaling solutions, with the kind of technical fluency that reminded everyone in the room why TechPulse had won this contract in the first place. She fielded questions about security protocols, data privacy compliance, and integration challenges with the easy confidence of someone who'd anticipated every possible concern. When she finished, Robert Henderson was already reaching for his phone. I need to discuss this with our board immediately. The improvements you're showing here could revolutionize our entire digital strategy. We're prepared to implement Phase 1 within the next 30 days, Ilaria said, sensing the close. And I'll personally oversee the integration to ensure seamless transition. Sold, Helena said, standing to shake hands. Same team, same project manager. We don't want anyone else touching this. As the Henderson team filed out, exchanging business cards and scheduling follow-up calls, Ilaria felt the familiar satisfaction of a presentation that had gone flawlessly. She'd secured the contract, impressed the clients, and demonstrated exactly why she deserved her position at TechPulse. But when the room emptied, and only she and Orion remained, the professional high crashed into something much more complicated. That was, Orion began, then stopped, running a hand over his head. Ilaria, that was extraordinary. I've seen presentations from teams at Apple, Google, Microsoft, and yours just outclassed all of them. The genuine awe in his voice made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with professional validation. "It's my job." No, that was artistry. The way you read the room, anticipated their concerns, explained complex concepts like you were telling a story. He shook his head. "I understand now why the Henderson team specifically requested you." Ilaria began packing up her laptop, suddenly desperate to escape the weight of his attention. "I should get back to my desk. Need to start the implementation timeline." "Ilaria, wait." His voice stopped her halfway to the door. "Can we talk? Really talk? Not the careful professional dance we've been doing." She turned back to find him standing closer than appropriate for a CEO and his employee, but not close enough for whatever they'd been before this corporate complication consumed everything. "What is there to talk about?" she asked quietly. "The fact that I can't stop thinking about you. The fact that watching you command that room just now made me proud in ways I have no right to feel. The fact that we're pretending Friday night didn't happen when it's the only thing that feels real in this entire building." The honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. "And the fact that none of that matters," she whispered, "because you're my boss now." The notification sound at 11:47 p.m. should have been her first warning to put the phone down. Ilaria lay in her bed, laptop balanced on her knees, supposedly working on the Henderson implementation timeline, but actually spiraling through the digital breadcrumbs of her life. Her Instagram had somehow suggested Orion's profile, Orion.Hale, 847 followers, mostly landscape photography and book recommendations. She'd stared at it for 20 minutes without clicking. Her thumb hovered over the follow button like it was a loaded weapon. "This is insane," she told herself, closing the app. But her brain had already memorized details. The photo of him reading in Central Park from 6 months ago, a picture of his morning coffee with the caption, "Small Victories," and a post about anxiety awareness that had 23 comments of support. Her phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Someone from her network had viewed her profile. Then another, and another. She switched to the app and froze. "Orion Hale viewed your profile 2 hours ago." Her heart hammered as she clicked through to see what he would have seen. Her professional headshot, carefully curated experience, recommendations from colleagues. But also, her recent activity. She'd liked an article about workplace relationships just yesterday, shared a post about mental health in tech leadership, and commented on a thread about navigating professional boundaries. Had he seen those? Was he analyzing her digital behavior the same way she was dissecting his? Her phone buzzed again. This time, a text from her best friend Jenna. "Girl, you've been radio silent since Friday. Either you're dead or you got some. Which is it?" Ilaria stared at the message, realizing she hadn't talked to anyone about the Orion situation. How could she? "Hey, remember how I complained about being lonely? Well, I had amazing sex with a stranger who turned out to be my new CEO, and now I can't function like a normal human being." She typed back, "Work stuff. New boss, it's complicated." "Is he hot?" Ilaria groaned and set the phone aside, but it immediately buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jenna. A Slack notification from ORO. "Hale, are you awake?" She stared at the message for a full minute, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear as he typed and deleted responses. Finally, another message appeared. "Sorry, inappropriate. Ignore that." But she was already typing, "I'm awake." The response came immediately. "Can't sleep either. Implementation timelines are riveting bedtime reading. I'm reading about corporate HR policies, specifically Section 4.3 regarding workplace relationships." Ilaria's breath caught. He was doing exactly what she was doing, trying to find a rule book for an impossible situation. And what does Section 4.3 say? 3 dots. Then, that we're in uncharted territory. She closed her laptop and picked up her phone, suddenly needing to move. Her small apartment felt suffocating, filled with the digital energy of conversations that couldn't happen, connections that existed in a gray area between professional and personal. Her TikTok algorithm, apparently reading her emotional state, served up a video titled, "When You Catch Feelings for the Wrong Person." She watched 3 seconds before swiping away, disturbed by how accurately the app had read her situation. Another Slack message. "I keep thinking about what you said, about pretending Friday didn't happen." Ilaria found herself typing before she could stop. "Have you figured out how to do that? Because I'm failing miserably." I made a mistake today. Her heart stopped. What kind of mistake? I looked up your previous projects, read your performance reviews, watched the client testimonial videos. That's not a mistake. That's due diligence. It is when I spent an hour watching you explain database architecture and thinking about how your mind works. When I should have been focusing on quarterly projections, I was remembering how you analyzed human behavior like it was poetry. Ilaria set the phone down and walked to her kitchen, needing distance from words that felt too dangerous to read. But her phone buzzed again, and she couldn't resist. I'm not good at this, Ilaria. At pretending professional distance when all I want is to know if you still think about Saturday morning. Her hands shook as she typed. All the time. Good. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. She poured herself a glass of water, buying time to think. This conversation was crossing every line they'd tried to draw, but it also felt like the first honest thing that had happened since Monday's revelation. What happens now? She typed. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, I don't know, but I can't keep pretending you're just another employee when you're the most remarkable person I've met in years. Ilaria leaned against her kitchen counter, staring at the message that changed everything. Outside her window, Austin's nightlife continued. People moving through their lives with normal complications, normal choices. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "This is terrifying." "Absolutely terrifying," came his reply. "But maybe that means it's worth the risk." Her phone showed 12:23 a.m. Tomorrow would bring another day of careful professionalism, strategic eye contact avoidance, and the exhausting performance of normalcy. But tonight, in the digital space between them, something had shifted. "We need rules," she typed finally. Agreed, starting with, "No more late-night Slack conversations that make me want to drive to your apartment." "Do you know where I live?" "No, but I could find out in approximately 30 seconds, which is exactly why we need rules." Despite everything, she smiled. Rule number 1, no stalking via company directory. Rule number 2, no analyzing my LinkedIn activity. Too late for that one. Then rule number 3, we figure this out together. No more pretending it doesn't exist. Ilaria stared at the message, knowing that agreeing meant stepping into territory that could destroy everything she'd worked for. "Okay," she typed, "but not here, not like this. Thursday, after our official meeting, we talk like adults who can't stop thinking about each other." Exactly like that. Thursday at 2 p.m. arrived like a judge's verdict. Ilaria sat in the same conference room B, where everything had started to unravel. Her quarterly report spread across the table in perfect order. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a charcoal blazer that meant business, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that said serious professional, armor disguised as executive wear. The door opened precisely at 2 o'clock. Orion entered, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of careful neutrality that probably fooled everyone except her. She could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped once against his leg before he caught himself. "Good afternoon, Ilaria." His voice was CEO formal, but her name still sounded different when he said it. "Mr. Hale," she gestured to the chair across from her, "I have the Q3 performance metrics ready for your review." They spent the first 20 minutes discussing actual business, project timelines, budget allocations, team performance indicators. Ilaria presented her quarterly achievements with the same precision she'd used for the Henderson presentation, and Orion asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated he'd actually read her reports in detail. It was professional, productive, completely normal. It was also torture. Every time their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same document, every time he leaned forward to examine a chart, and she caught the faint scent of his cologne, every time he said "excellent work" in that voice she remembered whispering other things entirely, it all felt like an elaborate performance for an audience of nobody. "Your team retention rates are impressive," Orion said, reviewing her staff development metrics. "In my experience, that level of loyalty usually indicates exceptional leadership." "Thank you," she replied, hating how formal she sounded. "I believe in creating an environment where people feel valued. It shows." He set down the report and looked at her directly for the first time since entering the room. "Your team speaks about you with genuine respect. That's rare." The compliment hit differently than the professional praise. It felt personal, like he was seeing her, really seeing her, not just evaluating her performance metrics. "Is that part of your assessment?" she asked carefully. "Everything is part of my assessment." His eyes held hers for a moment too long. "But some observations are more relevant than others." The careful dance they'd been performing started to crack around the edges. "Anything else you need to review?" Ilaria asked, gathering her papers with slightly unsteady hands. "Actually, yes." Orion reached into his portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I have some questions about the San Diego conference next month, the Client Development Summit." Ilaria's breath caught. She'd forgotten about the conference, a 3-day event where TechPulse would be showcasing their services to potential West Coast clients. As senior project manager, she was scheduled to attend. As CEO, so was he. "What about it?" she asked quietly. "The agenda shows several collaborative presentations. You and I would be working closely together for 3 days. He paused, his professional mask slipping slightly. "Given our situation, I wanted to discuss whether that arrangement still makes sense." The question hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Ilaria stared at the conference schedule, seeing hotel names and meeting rooms that suddenly felt loaded with possibility and danger. "Are you asking if I can be professional for 3 days?" Her voice carried an edge she hadn't intended. "I'm asking if I can be." The honesty in his admission surprised them both. "Ilaria, I spent 2 hours yesterday reviewing client proposals, but all I could think about was how you explained user behavior patterns like you were solving mysteries. When I should have been focused on revenue projections, I was wondering what books you're reading, what music you listen to when you work late, whether you still drink oat milk lattes." The confession spilled out like he'd been holding it back for days. Ilaria felt something crack in her chest, the careful wall she'd built between Friday night and Monday morning. "You can't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because it's inappropriate. Because there are rules about workplace relationships." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Those rules assume this is something that can be managed with policy changes and professional boundaries. They don't account for this." "For what?" "For the fact that I've been awake every night since Monday thinking about how you looked at me when you thought I was sleeping. For the way you challenge ideas like you're fighting for something important. For how you made me feel like myself for the first time in months." Ilaria's carefully constructed professional demeanor began to crumble. "Orion, I know this is complicated. I know I could lose my job, and you could lose yours. I know there are 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "But I also know that I meant what I said Tuesday night, about this being worth the risk." The conference schedule lay between them like evidence of impossible choices. 3 days in San Diego, hotel rooms down the hall from each other, professional obligations that would require them to work side by side while pretending the tension between them didn't exist. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending this is going away. I'm suggesting we find a way to navigate this like the adults we claim to be." His eyes searched her face. "And I'm suggesting that maybe 3 days away from this building, away from all the watching eyes and corporate expectations, might give us the space to figure out what this actually is." Ilaria looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not her CEO but the man who'd turned off his phone and talked about books until 2 a.m., the man who'd held her like she was something precious, instead of just another Friday night. "This could destroy everything," she said quietly. "So could continuing to pretend it doesn't exist." He finally let his fingers brush against hers, just barely, just enough to remind them both that this was real. The question is, what are we more afraid of losing? Outside the conference room, she could see their colleagues moving through their normal Thursday afternoon routines. Marketing meetings, budget reviews, coffee breaks filled with harmless office gossip. Normal people with normal complications. "San Diego," she said finally. "San Diego," he agreed. And just like that, they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond her hotel window, but Ilaria couldn't appreciate the view. She stood in her room at the Marriott Gaslamp Quarter, still in her conference attire from day one of the summit, watching the sunset paint the San Diego skyline in shades of amber and rose. Her presentation had gone flawlessly. 3 potential clients already requesting follow-up meetings. her technical demonstrations earning the kind of attention that usually made her feel invincible. Instead, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. 2 floors below, she knew Orion was in a similar room, probably staring at the same sunset, dealing with the same impossible tension that had been building all day. They'd managed to maintain perfect professionalism during their joint presentations, tag-teaming client questions with the synchronized precision of partners who understood each other's rhythms, which only made everything worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "How's the conference? Meet any interesting people?" Ilaria almost laughed. If only you knew. She was typing a deflecting response when a knock interrupted her thoughts. Soft, hesitant, like the person wasn't sure they should be there. She opened the door to find Orion, still wearing his conference clothes but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. He looked as exhausted as she felt. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey yourself." She stepped aside to let him in, her heart racing at the simple intimacy of having him in her space again. "How did the dinner with Morrison Industries go?" "Successfully. They want to move forward with a pilot program." He moved to the window, keeping careful distance between them. "But I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could think about was how you handled the database architecture questions this afternoon. You made me look good in front of clients who could make or break our West Coast expansion." "It's my job," she said, echoing her words from days earlier. "No, it was partnership. The way you picked up my explanation when I lost the thread, how you anticipated their concerns before they even voiced them." He turned to face her. "I've never worked with anyone who understood my thinking that intuitively." Ilaria leaned against the dresser, maintaining the physical distance while feeling the emotional space between them shrinking rapidly. "Orion, why are you here?" "Because I've been walking around this hotel for an hour trying to convince myself not to knock on your door." His honesty was becoming a dangerous habit. "Because being professional with you all day felt like holding my breath." "And what happens if you stop holding your breath?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way 3 days of pretending had worn him down. "I tell you that watching you command those conference rooms today reminded me why I fell for you in the first place. I tell you that every client who complimented your expertise made me want to tell them you're brilliant in ways they can't even imagine." "You fell for me?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Orion paused, realizing what he'd admitted. "Is that so surprising? A woman who reads people like literature, who explains complex ideas like she's sharing secrets, who makes me feel like the best version of myself." He ran a hand over his head. "Ilaria, I was halfway in love with you before I knew your last name." The confession hit her like a wave, washing away the careful barriers she'd constructed. "This is insane. Completely insane." He stepped closer, near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "But I can't keep pretending it's not real. These 3 days, working beside you, watching other people see what I see, I'm tired of fighting this." Ilaria looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not her CEO but the man who'd admitted his fears about anxiety and burnout, who'd talked about books with the passion of someone starved for genuine connection. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know how to be your boss when all I want is to be the person you trust with your real thoughts. I'm saying that every HR policy in the world can't change the fact that you're the first person in years who makes me want to be brave." Outside their window, San Diego's nightlife was beginning. Couples walking hand in hand along the harbor, friends heading to dinner, normal people navigating normal relationships without corporate complications. "Orion," she whispered, her resolve cracking. "I know all the reasons this won't work. I know about power dynamics and professional ethics and the fact that Austin's tech community loves gossip." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious. "But I also know that losing you feels worse than any professional consequence." Ilaria stared at their joined hands, feeling the last of her defenses crumble. "I've been terrified." "Of what?" "Of wanting this as much as I do. Of the fact that when I'm with you, I forget about being careful, about protecting myself, about all the ways I've learned to navigate the world as a black woman in tech." Her voice grew stronger. "You make me feel safe enough to be reckless, and that scares the hell out of me. Good reckless or bad reckless." Despite everything, she smiled. "The kind that makes me want to stop planning exit strategies and start imagining possibilities." Orion lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. What if we stopped imagining and started trying? What about work? About tech pulse? About the fact that you're my boss and this could ruin both our careers? What if we figured it out as we go? What if we stopped letting fear make our decisions? His eyes searched hers. Ilaria, I've spent months in therapy learning that some risks are worth taking. You're worth taking. She studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the executive confidence, the way he was offering her his truth without guarantees. This changes everything, she said softly. Everything was already changed the moment I walked into that conference room Monday morning. He cupped her face gently. This just makes it honest. Ilaria leaned into his touch, feeling the rightness of it despite all the complications. So, what happens now? Now we stop pretending. He smiled, the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him since Austin. And maybe we start figuring out what happens when two people who are supposed to be impossible actually work. As the San Diego sunset faded into evening, Ilaria made a choice that would reshape everything she thought she knew about risk, love, and the possibility of having both. The Austin humidity hit them like a slap of reality the moment they stepped off the plane. Ilaria walked through the terminal beside Orion, their professional distance carefully measured, their shared secret heavy between them like humidity before a storm. San Diego felt like a dream now. 3 days where they'd existed in a bubble of conference presentations and stolen moments, where they'd finally stopped pretending. Now, walking past familiar gates toward baggage claim, the weight of what they'd decided pressed down on them. "Text me when you get home," Orion said quietly as they reached the parking garage, his voice carrying the careful neutrality they'd perfected for public spaces. "I will." Ilaria adjusted her laptop bag, wanting desperately to touch him, but knowing they were probably being watched by someone from the office. Austin's tech community was small, and TechPulse employees had a habit of taking the same flights. They separated at the parking garage elevator, heading to different levels, different cars, different apartments, but Ilaria could still feel the weight of his hand in hers from the night before, still hear his whispered promises about figuring things out together. Her phone buzzed as she unlocked her Honda Civic. Already missing San Diego. She smiled despite herself, typing back, "Missing the conference or missing being honest?" Both, mostly the second one. The drive home gave her too much time to think. What had felt possible in a hotel room overlooking the Pacific suddenly seemed impossible in Austin traffic. How did you navigate a relationship with your CEO? How did you explain late-night texts to HR? How did you handle the whispered speculation that would inevitably follow? Her apartment felt different when she walked in. Smaller, lonelier, like it belonged to the version of herself that existed before San Diego. She unpacked mechanically, hanging up conference clothes that still smelled faintly like hotel detergent and possibility. Her phone rang as she was transferring conference notes to her laptop. Jenna's name flashed on the screen. "Okay, spill," Jenna said without preamble. "You've been weird for 2 weeks and your texts from San Diego were suspicious as hell. What happened?" Ilaria stared at her reflection in her bedroom mirror, seeing someone who looked like her but felt fundamentally changed. "It's complicated. Is this about the hot new boss you mentioned? Please tell me you didn't sleep with your CEO." The accuracy of the guess made Ilaria's stomach drop. "Jenna, oh my God, you did. Girl, are you insane? Do you know what happens to women who get involved with their bosses, especially black women? You might as well have painted a target on your career." "It's not like that," Ilaria protested, but even as she said it, she could hear how naive it sounded. "It's exactly like that. No matter how this ends, you're the one who'll pay the price. He's the CEO, he has power, protection, plausible deniability. You're the project manager who couldn't keep it professional." Each word hit like a physical blow, because Ilaria had been thinking the same things during the drive home. The euphoria of San Diego was fading, replaced by the harsh mathematics of workplace politics and power dynamics. "You don't understand," she said weakly. "I understand that you're brilliant and hardworking and you've spent years building a reputation in this industry. And now you're risking all of it for what? Good sex and romantic feelings?" Jenna's voice softened slightly. "Honey, I love you, but this is career suicide." After Jenna hung up, Ilaria sat in her silent apartment, staring at her phone. The text from Orion still glowed on the screen. "Already missing San Diego." She started typing responses and deleting them. Me too. Delete. We need to talk. Delete. This is too complicated. Delete. Finally, she set the phone aside without responding. Monday morning arrived with the cruel efficiency of a deadline. Ilaria dressed in her most professional outfit, a navy suit that meant business, minimal makeup, hair pulled back severely, armor for battle. The Tech Pulse office felt different as she walked through the lobby. Every conversation seemed to pause as she passed. Every glance felt loaded with speculation. She was probably imagining it, but paranoia felt safer than naivety. Her team greeted her normally, eager to hear about the San Diego presentations. She gave them the professional highlights: successful client meetings, promising leads, positive feedback. She didn't mention the way Orion had looked at her during the database architecture demo, or how he'd found excuses to walk past her hotel room, or the conversation that had changed everything. At 10 a.m., her calendar showed a team meeting in conference room A. She arrived early, reviewing her notes, trying to recapture the professional confidence that had felt so natural just days before. Orion entered precisely on time, followed by Marcus and the senior staff. He looked every inch the polished CEO. Fresh haircut, perfectly fitted suit, the kind of authoritative presence that commanded attention. When his eyes met hers across the conference table, she saw everything they couldn't say. The memory of whispered confessions, the weight of decisions made in hotel rooms, the impossible complexity of translating private moments into public reality. "Good morning, everyone," Orion began, his voice carrying no trace of the man who'd held her hand and promised they'd figure things out together. "Let's review the San Diego outcomes." For the next hour, they discussed client feedback, implementation timelines, and revenue projections with professional precision. Ilaria presented her follow-up strategies, answered questions about technical specifications, and participated in strategic planning discussions like the competent project manager she'd always been. But underneath the professional performance, she felt something cracking. When the meeting ended and the room emptied, she found herself alone with Orion for the first time since the airport. "How are you?" he asked quietly, the CEO mask slipping slightly. "Confused," she admitted. "Jenna thinks I'm destroying my career. My brain keeps cycling through worst-case scenarios, and I can't figure out how to be in the same room with you without everyone knowing exactly what I'm thinking." Orion closed the conference room door and moved closer, but stopped just short of touching her. "Are you having second thoughts?" The question hung between them like a test. Ilaria looked at him, this man who'd become both her greatest risk and her deepest desire, and felt the weight of everything they were trying to navigate. "I don't know," she whispered. "Are you?" The answer came 3 days later in the form of a panic attack at 2:17 a.m. Ilaria woke gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. Her apartment felt too small, the air too thin, her thoughts spiraling through every possible catastrophe that could result from loving the wrong person at the wrong time. She'd been trying to maintain normalcy, professional meetings, casual conversations with colleagues, carefully measured interactions with Orion that revealed nothing. But the effort was killing her slowly, like holding her breath underwater while pretending she could swim forever. Her phone showed 17 unread messages from Orion sent over the past 3 days. She'd been ignoring them, afraid that responding would either push her deeper into an impossible situation or reveal just how close she was to drowning. At 6 a.m., she called in sick for the first time in 2 years. Instead of going to Tech Pulse, she drove to her therapist's office, grateful for the emergency appointment Dr. Williams had managed to squeeze in. The waiting room smelled like lavender and false calm, filled with self-help books and inspirational posters that felt patronizing in her current state. "Talk to me about what's changed since our last session," Dr. Williams said, settling into her familiar chair with the kind of professional patience that cost $150 an hour. Ilaria stared at the tissue box, wondering how to explain that she'd fallen for her CEO and was now questioning every decision she'd ever made about risk, love, and professional survival. "I'm involved with someone I shouldn't be involved with," she said finally. "Married?" "My boss." Dr. Williams didn't flinch, but Ilaria caught the slight shift in her expression. "Tell me about that." For the next 50 minutes, Ilaria unloaded everything. The coffee shop meeting, the magical night that had felt like a gift from the universe, the devastating Monday morning revelation, San Diego's false promise of possibility, and the crushing reality of trying to navigate impossible circumstances. What scares you most about this situation? Dr. Williams asked. Everything. Ilaria laughed bitterly. I'm scared of losing my job, losing my reputation, being seen as the woman who slept her way into relevance. I'm scared of the whispers, the assumptions, the way people will rewrite my accomplishments to fit their narrative about women who can't keep it professional. And what scares you about ending it? The question hit harder than expected. Losing the only person who's made me feel like myself in years. Going back to being careful, strategic, alone. Her voice cracked. He sees me, Dr. Williams. Not just the professional mask I wear to survive, but actually me. And I'm terrified that walking away from that means walking away from the possibility of being truly known. Those are both valid fears, Dr. Williams said gently. What would it look like to honor both your need for professional security and your need for authentic connection? I don't know if they can coexist. Have you talked to him about your concerns? Ilaria shook her head. I've been avoiding him. He keeps texting, asking if I'm okay, wanting to talk. But every time I think about responding, I panic. What would happen if you did respond? We'd probably end up making decisions that prioritize feelings over logic. And I can't afford that kind of luxury. Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly. Ilaria, can I ask you something? In your description of this relationship, you focused extensively on the professional risks, but you haven't mentioned whether you love him. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ilaria felt tears she hadn't realized were building spillover. I think I do, she whispered, and that's what makes this so impossible. By the time she left Dr. Williams' office, her phone showed 23 missed calls from TechPulse and 42 unread messages. Apparently, the Henderson Industries contract had hit a snag, and everyone was looking for the project manager who'd mysteriously disappeared. She drove to the office in a haze of guilt and determination, knowing she couldn't hide forever, but dreading the confrontation that awaited her. The TechPulse lobby felt like walking into a courtroom. Marcus spotted her immediately, relief and irritation warring on his face. There you are, Henderson called an emergency meeting. They're threatening to pull out unless we can address their concerns about data security protocols. We need you in conference room A in 5 minutes. Ilaria nodded, grabbing her laptop and falling into crisis management mode. This was familiar territory. Technical problems with clear solutions, client concerns that could be addressed with competence and preparation. She was halfway to the conference room when she saw Orion standing by the elevators, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the busy hallway, and she saw everything she'd been trying to avoid: worry, frustration, and something that looked dangerously close to heartbreak. He started walking toward her, and panic flared in her chest. I can't, she said, before he could speak, her voice barely audible. Not now, not here. Ilaria, please. The word came out like a prayer. I can't do this right now. She turned and walked toward the conference room, leaving him standing in the hallway with all the words they needed to say trapped between them. The Henderson meeting was a disaster. Without the seamless partnership she and Orion had developed, their presentation felt disjointed, unprofessional. Her technical explanations lacked their usual confidence, and his strategic overview seemed disconnected from her implementation details. The clients noticed. They asked pointed questions about team coordination, expressed concerns about TechPulse's internal communication, and ultimately requested time to reassess their options. When the room emptied, Ilaria found herself alone with the wreckage of what should have been a routine client retention meeting. Orion returned from walking the Henderson team to the elevator, his face grim. We need to talk, he said, closing the conference room door. I know. That meeting was a disaster, because we're both falling apart trying to pretend this doesn't exist. His voice carried an edge of frustration she'd never heard before. We just potentially lost our biggest client because we can't figure out how to be in the same room together. I know, she repeated, the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. So what's the plan, Ilaria? Do we keep destroying everything we've both worked for because we're too scared to have an honest conversation? Do we let our personal complications kill the professional partnership that was working before we made it complicated? She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the man she'd fallen for, but the CEO who was watching his company suffer because his project manager was having an emotional breakdown. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to love you and keep my job and maintain my integrity and protect myself from all the ways this could destroy everything I've built." "Love me." He stepped closer, his anger shifting to something softer. "Did you just say you love me?" The words had slipped out without permission, but now they hung between them like a confession that changed everything. "I didn't mean to say that." "But did you mean it?" Ilaria stared at him, seeing all the ways her life could implode written in his hopeful expression, and made the choice that would define everything that came next. "Yes," she whispered, "and that's exactly why this has to end." 2 weeks of silence felt like drowning in slow motion. Ilaria threw herself into work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun their own heart. She arrived early, stayed late, and turned the Henderson crisis into a masterclass in damage control. Emergency presentations, revised security protocols, and client calls that stretched past midnight, anything to avoid the empty space where Orion used to exist. He'd respected her request for distance with a professionalism that somehow made everything worse. No more late-night Slack messages, no lingering glances in meetings, no accidental touches reaching for the same document. He was every inch the perfect CEO, and she was suffocating on the absence of everything that had made her feel alive. The Henderson contract was salvaged through sheer force of will and technical brilliance, but the victory felt hollow. She'd saved the account by becoming the version of herself that existed before coffee shops and whispered confessions. Competent, isolated, safe. On a Thursday evening that felt like every other Thursday evening, Ilaria was packing up her laptop when Marcus knocked on her cubicle wall. "Hey, got a minute?" He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his phone. "Orion asked me to let you know he's taking some time off. Medical leave, actually." The words hit her like ice water. "What?" "Stress-related health issues. His doctor recommended he step back for a few weeks, maybe longer." Marcus lowered his voice. "Between you and me, he's been looking rough lately. Whatever's going on, it's taking a toll." Ilaria's carefully constructed composure cracked. "Is he okay?" "Honestly, I don't think so. He mentioned something about anxiety, maybe depression. Said he needed to get his head right before he could effectively lead the company." Marcus studied her expression. "You two worked pretty closely together. Did you notice anything?" "Did I notice?" Ilaria wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. She'd noticed everything. The way he'd started drinking more coffee, the slight tremor in his hands during presentations, the careful mask he wore that never quite hid the exhaustion in his eyes. She'd noticed, and she'd done nothing, because she was too busy protecting herself to see that he was falling apart. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. He didn't say, just that he'd be in touch when he was ready to discuss his return. That evening, Ilaria sat in her apartment staring at her phone, Orion's contact information glowing on the screen. She'd typed and deleted a dozen messages over the past 2 hours, each one feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what she needed to say. Finally, she called Jenna. "I think I made a terrible mistake," she said without preamble. "The CEO thing? Good. I was wondering when you'd come to your senses." "No, Jenna. The opposite. I think walking away was the mistake." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Ilaria to question whether the call had dropped. "Explain," Jenna said finally. "He's on medical leave. Stress, anxiety, maybe depression. And I can't stop thinking that maybe I could have helped. Maybe my fear of professional consequences was less important than the fact that he was struggling." "Ilaria, I love him." The words came out stronger than she'd expected. "I love him, and I chose my career over his well-being. I chose fear over the possibility that maybe, just maybe, some things are worth the risk." "And what changed your mind?" Ilaria looked around her empty apartment, successful, safe, and completely devoid of joy. "The realization that protecting my professional reputation isn't worth much if I lose myself in the process." She found his address in the company directory, driving through Austin's evening traffic with the kind of single-minded determination that had once carried her through graduate school and early career challenges. Her Honda Civic felt inadequate for the gravity of what she was attempting, but she kept driving anyway. Orion lived in a modern complex near Lake Austin, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. She climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment like she was walking toward her own execution, The man who opened the door looked like a shadow of the CEO she'd fallen for. His usual careful grooming had given way to several days of stubble, his eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, and he was wearing a faded t-shirt that had seen better years. Ilaria? He looked genuinely shocked to see her. "What are you doing here?" "Making a choice I should have made weeks ago." She stepped closer, noting the way he instinctively moved back. "Can I come in?" His apartment was sparsely furnished but warm, with bookshelves that revealed his personality and a view of the lake that probably cost more than her annual salary. Classical music played softly from speakers she couldn't see, and the coffee table was covered with therapy worksheets and medication bottles that told a story she wished she'd been there to witness. "Marcus told me about the medical leave," she said, settling onto his couch without invitation. "I needed time to get my head straight." Orion remained standing, maintaining distance like he was afraid of getting too close. "The anxiety was getting worse, and my therapist said I was showing signs of clinical depression." "When did it start?" "You know when it started." His voice carried a pain that made her chest ache. "It started when the most important person in my world decided I wasn't worth the risk." The accusation hung between them, like evidence of all the ways she'd failed him. "You're right," she said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I chose fear over love. I'm sorry I prioritized my career over your well-being, and I'm sorry it took me this long to realize that some things matter more than professional safety." Orion finally sat down, but on the opposite end of the couch like she might be contagious. "What changed?" "The realization that I'd rather risk everything with you than be safe without you." She turned to face him fully. "Orion, I've spent my entire career building walls to protect myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. But those walls didn't just keep out the bad things. They kept out everything that could have made me truly happy. Ilaria, I love you." The words came out fierce, desperate. "I love your terrible Baldwin quotes, and your anxiety about being a good leader, and the way you see potential in people before they see it in themselves. I love that you turned off your phone to be present with me, and I love that you're brave enough to get help when you need it." She moved closer, close enough to see the hope warring with caution in his expression. "I love you enough to figure out the logistics. I love you enough to face whatever professional consequences come from choosing happiness over safety, and I love you enough to stay and help you through whatever you're dealing with, if you'll let me." Orion stared at her for a long moment, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "What about your job, your reputation, all the things that made this impossible? What about them?" She reached for his hands, gently unclenching his fingers. "I spent so much time protecting a career that I forgot why I wanted it in the first place. Success means nothing if I'm too scared to live while I'm achieving it. And if it doesn't work out, if the complications become too much, then we'll figure it out together. But Orion, I can't keep choosing fear over love. It's killing me slowly, and apparently it's killing you too." He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face, searching for something she hoped he could find. "I meant what I said in San Diego," he said quietly, "about this being worth the risk. So did I. It just took me a while to be brave enough to believe it." Orion lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek with reverent gentleness. "I love you too," he whispered, "even when you were breaking my heart. Even when I couldn't sleep or eat or think about anything else. I loved you." "And now?" He smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, the expression transforming his exhausted features into something that looked like hope. "Now I want to figure out how to love you properly. With honesty, with courage, with whatever it takes to make this work." As the Austin skyline twinkled beyond his windows, Ilaria kissed the man she'd almost lost to her own fear, tasting possibility and promise, and the rare gift of second chances. They had details to work out, complications to navigate, and a future to build from the wreckage of their careful plans. But they had each other, finally and completely, and that felt like everything. 6 months later, the Monarch Coffee House still served the same oat milk lattes, but everything else had changed. Ilaria sat at a table near the window, watching the familiar Friday evening crowd filter in and out while she waited. Her laptop was closed this time. No Duolingo lessons abandoned mid-sentence, no podcasts about thriving in isolation, no dating apps promising connections that never quite materialized. Instead, she was reading Giovanni's Room, The same Baldwin novel Orion had been carrying that first night. She'd bought it the week after they'd decided to stop running from what they'd found in each other, and now she understood why he'd loved it enough to carry it everywhere. You don't have a home until you leave it, and then when you have left it, you never can go back. She'd left her old home, the carefully constructed life of professional safety and emotional distance, and discovered she didn't want to return to it. The door chimed, and she looked up to see Orion scanning the cafe until his eyes found hers. 6 months of therapy, medication adjustments, and learning to love openly had transformed him back into the man she'd glimpsed that first night. Confident but not guarded, ambitious but not desperate, present in ways that made her heart skip. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the seat across from her with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. "The Henderson call ran long, but I have good news. They want to expand the contract. They want to make us their exclusive tech partner for the next 3 years. His smile carried the satisfaction of someone whose professional instincts had been vindicated. Apparently, our seamless collaboration impressed their board enough to bet their digital future on us. Ilaria laughed, remembering the disaster of that first meeting after San Diego when they'd barely been able to function in the same room. If only they knew how unseamless we were 6 months ago. If only they knew a lot of things. Orion reached across the table to take her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing now. Speaking of which, I have something for you. He pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket, setting it between them with the kind of careful ceremony that made her stomach flutter with anticipation. What's this for? 6 months since you showed up at my apartment and reminded me that some risks are worth taking. His eyes held the warmth she'd learned to trust completely. 6 months since we stopped pretending we could live without each other. Inside the box was a key, brass, slightly worn, with a small tag that read, "Home." "It's the spare to my apartment," he said quietly, "but it's also an invitation to stop maintaining separate lives, separate spaces, separate futures. To build something together that's bigger than the sum of our individual fears." Ilaria stared at the key, feeling the weight of what he was offering. Not just shared living space, but the acknowledgement that they'd moved beyond the crisis management phase of their relationship into something sustainable and real. What about work? The gossip? The complications? What about them? He smiled, echoing her words from that night 6 months ago. "We filed the disclosure with HR 3 months ago. Marcus has been nothing but supportive, especially since our team performance has improved dramatically. And honestly, anyone who has opinions about our relationship can deal with the fact that we're both better at our jobs when we're not pretending to be people we're not." She picked up the key, feeling its solid weight against her palm. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure that I love waking up next to you on the weekends when you stay over. I'm sure that I love planning projects with someone who challenges my thinking and makes me better at everything I do. I'm sure that I love the version of myself I am when I'm with you." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "I'm sure that I want to find out what happens when we stop testing this and start building it." Ilaria looked around the cafe where everything had started. The same tables, the same lighting, the same sense of possibility that had drawn two lonely people together on a Friday night when they'd both been tired of performing solitude. "Yes," she said, closing her fingers around the key. "Yes to all of it." Orion's smile could have powered the entire coffee shop. He leaned across the table to kiss her, soft and certain, while around them the familiar Friday evening chaos continued, couples sharing desserts, friends laughing over craft beer, scattered individuals hopefully nursing their drinks and checking their phones. "There's one more thing," he said when they broke apart. "I've been thinking about taking a sabbatical next year. 6 months, maybe a year. To write the book I've been talking about forever. To travel somewhere that doesn't have cell service. To remember what it feels like to exist without an agenda." "That sounds amazing," she said, meaning it completely. "I was hoping you might want to come with me." His voice carried the careful hope of someone making an offer that could change everything. "Take a leave of absence. Write your own book about navigating tech as a black woman. See what happens when we remove all the external pressures and just focus on being us." The invitation hung between them, like a door opening onto a future she'd never dared to imagine. A year of mornings without alarm clocks, evenings without email notifications, days structured around curiosity instead of quarterly reports. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "You can take all the time you need." He squeezed her hand. "But remember what you told me 6 months ago. Some things are worth the risk." As they left the cafe together, walking past the spot where they'd first locked eyes across a crowded room, Ilaria felt the future stretching ahead of them like an unwritten story. There would be challenges, complications, moments when choosing love over safety would test their resolve. But they would face them together, with honesty instead of fear, with partnership instead of isolation, with the hard-won knowledge that authentic connection was worth whatever professional complications it might bring. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Dinner this weekend? I want to hear how domestic life is treating you." Ilaria typed back, "Can't this weekend. Moving in with my boyfriend. The CEO. Girl, you really went all in on this crazy idea. Completely all in. And it's the best decision I've ever made." As she hit send, Orion wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer as they walked toward their cars, soon to be just one car, one apartment, one shared life built on the foundation of a Friday night when two people had been brave enough to turn off their phones and remember what it felt like to be human. The Austin skyline glittered ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from finally finding home in another person. Thank you for following Ilaria and Orion's journey. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all. Have you ever been brave enough to choose love over safety? What would you do if faced with their impossible choice? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.